Dear friends, welcome to another video of Fathoming Mind. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the psychotherapy. So what is psychotherapy? So we have heard about often this term psychotherapy. Psychotherapy merely means a relationship between the client and a therapist. So who is a client? A client is a person who is having some emotional burdens or some kind of distress in his mind and he is approaching the therapist. The therapist means the one who gives a professional help to the client to get rid of his emotional distress or problems which is related to the mind. So in everyday life we undergo different kind of situations in our life. It may be stressful events and things like that. So the psychotherapy can help the person to understand and to have insight into the problems. And here, what is the speciality of a therapist, a psychotherapist? A psychotherapist should be a person of empathy than sympathy. What is this empathy? Empathy means the understanding of the person's understanding the other person's real problem intellectually. So how can we understand? So for that we have to think in the other man's shoes and accept his feelings and emotions as our own and try to make an intellectual change in that feelings and emotion by changing the thought patterns of the individual. So here the therapist should be a person who is really a person who is having empathy, as well as he also should be able to give unconditional positive regard to the client. What is this unconditional positive regard? So when the client is coming to say his problems to the therapist, the client will have so many various types of problems, the varieties of problems. So in that situation, the therapist should be very supportive and listening to the client, as his body language and his expression and even his genuine heart should be felt by the client, and the client should feel that the therapist is completely listening and accepting the client. So here the client he feels a kind of a relationship with the therapist, a kind of attachment to the therapist, and he or she expresses his or her own problems to the therapist, and therapist understands the problems and gives a remedy to the problems. So why a psychotherapy is conducted? What is the purpose of that? So let us see what are the purposes of the psychotherapy. So the first purpose is to give an emotional insight to the client. So when the client is coming into the therapist, the client is bombarded with the emotions. So here the therapist is helping the client to find an insight into his own emotions or her own emotions. So here therapist works as a facilitator who is helping the client to identify his or her own problems and have an insight into his life. The second thing is decision making. So because the client is bombarded by the emotions, the client is not able to take a proper decision. So here the therapist again works as a facilitator and helps the client to look it into his own self and identify the obstacles or the barriers for making the decision, and helps him or her to make a decision. Third point is to adjust with the daily life. Here, when the distress is alleviated from the mind of the client is able to understand the daily life in a proper sense and able to adjust with the demands of life and lead a healthy life, and at last to lead a healthy life. So here the client is enabled to lead a healthy life which is away from all kind of emotional distress, or in which he is able to deal with the emotional distress with a proper self-awareness and self-insight. So these are the goals of the psychotherapy. So we understand what is psychotherapy and what is the purpose of conducting a psychotherapy and how a person is getting insight from the psychotherapy. Thank you, dear friends.